the brightness was brighter than anything I'd seen in Ireland in the morning. The bright sunshine, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And the sun was shining. And the trees, the palm trees. I was not expecting the palm trees. And then tall, stately black people with baskets on their heads. You don't see it anymore. And they were selling vegetables. And I noticed some men pushing go-karts, also selling vegetables. And what struck me immediately, and for a long time after, the long plaintive cries advertising what they were selling. It was hard to understand what they were saying because the vowels got lengthened. The local people knew them.
Fresh collard greens.
Yes, all those things, and maybe fish, some of them. Yeah. And that struck me importantly. Now, I was accustomed to some of that. In the city of Galway in Ireland, the women from the West would go with baskets of fish on their heads and calling them, selling them, the fresh fish from Galway Bay. They were very good fish. You bought them, they'd be good for a day at any rate. And they had to sell them fast. It'd be no good for anyone. Walk. When I came back, I had a lot of tiny little pimples, an outbreak. And I said to Bishop Keys, it must be the food is affecting me already. Oh, he said there were mosquito bites. I'd never been bitten by a mosquito before. And my tender Irish flesh overreacted terribly. And I realized the truth of what we read in our history books about the Irish here of the last century, going down before the malaria,
yellow fever,
and the yellow fever.
So those are sights, those are scenes that Flannery O'Connor herself might have seen. She would have been about 9 years old then. Now, we'll also hear from Bill Canty, who lived from 1903 until 2002. He was proud of the fact he never once got behind the wheel of a car because he worked for the railroads. He was one of 10 children born to John Francis Canty and Elizabeth Fitzgerald, who came to Savannah from Listowel in County Kerry, Ireland. As sources of institutional memory, Bourke and Canty bring us much closer to the heart of the world that made Flannery O'Connor. And I'm very grateful to Jimmy Buttimer and Jillian Brown from the Diocese of Savannah for making these private recordings available to us. But before we listen to more voices from the past, I want to make sure I have your attention, so let's talk about mules for a moment, and specifically dead mules. You see, according to an article by Jerry Mills that's something of a cult classic among those of us who study Southern literature, the dead mule is the best litmus test of whether or not a work of Southern fiction is genuine. Is it Southern or not? Well, is there a dead mule? And you can try this out. I mean, it's unbelievable, but it doesn't matter if it's Faulkner or Welty or whoever. You know, they all have a dead mule in there somewhere. So to honor this secret handshake of Southern writers, I am generously going to give away a dead mule tonight. Everybody ready for this? All you have to do is be the first person to raise your hand and to do this. Name a quotation, anecdote, or story connecting Flannery O'Connor to a mule. Yes.
Mrs. Turpin's husband, Claude, get kicked by a mule.
There you go. There we are. Well done. Just never to. You've got a new one for your collection. Now, someone last night was familiar with this quotation from Flannery O'Connor, and the idea was that when Faulkner is driving the train, you don't want your mule and wagon stalled on the same track that it's roaring down. And in fact, there were some other references. We now have one of the 3 short stories where mules are mentioned. And purportedly, she gave one to Regina, her mother, for Mother's Day in 1962. In order to demonstrate that Flannery O'Connor's world was both very Southern and very Catholic, let's hear for a moment again from Monsignor Bourke.
And I remember one time in Albany, he rattled off a mule. the Irish horse traders had given him a mule. And the man who won the mule came to collect the mule. But Father should have been in a quandary, but it didn't faze him. He said, I can't give you the mule. Why not? He said, the mule is dead. The mule has died. And the mule was dead. The mule probably wasn't worth very much.
Did you catch that? They raffled off a mule at the church, and then when someone went to claim it, it was dead. So you can see it's very Southern, but anyhow, now I'm going to stop beating never mind. Hugh Brown noted that Catholics in Savannah lived in their own little world. What O'Connor understood for certain were the points of union between the conservative philosophies of Irish Catholics and fundamentalists. And Burke saw those conservative tendencies transmitted, unbroken, across the seas. When asked about making the transition from Ireland to becoming a parish priest in Georgia, he explained those affinities.
But I enjoyed the seminary life there. Now, when I joined as a seminarian in the Diocese of Savannah, I read about the history, got to know something about the geography and the people. So when I came to Savannah, I wasn't exactly a stranger. I didn't feel myself as such at any rate. And so you asked me, what was the most difficult transition in becoming a parish priest in Georgia? Honestly, I can't say that there was any difficulty at all. I took to it as a duck to water. I was only a month in Savannah when I felt quite at home here. And as I've said before, one of these interviews, I felt just as home walking down the streets of Savannah, down Broughton Street, as I did down O'Connell Street in Dublin, or in O'Connell Street of my native town. It happened to be the name of the principal street also. So I had no difficulty whatsoever there, and I felt the people of Savannah just very similar to the people I'd grown up. They talked with a different accent. They considered me speaking with a strange accent, but we're thinking the same way, had the same background, the same traditions, and everything else.
One aspect of those similarities was a degree of class consciousness that you'll find throughout O'Connor's work. Its origins are complex, and they're tied up in colonialism and the immigrant experience, but the familiar shorthand for it is the distinction between lace curtain and shanty Irish. Bear in mind that shanty is a word from the Irish language absorbed directly into English. So there's a hint of that here where Mrs. May talks about how people enter society. But beyond class distinctions, Flannery O'Connor would have seen Irish Catholic women prominently involved in religion. The Sisters of Mercy, for example, provided health care for the indigent and abandoned for many decades. They were, quite simply, the social safety net. And the Mercy nuns who taught at St. Vincent's Grammar School were mostly Irish women in their late teens, newly arrived, trained in Baltimore, and whisked away to schools down the seaboard. While the men waged their rhetorical battles in various Irish associations, the women often carried out the unheralded work of religious instruction, charity, and in Burke's words, simply keeping the faith. Bill Candy, for example, was never schooled by nuns, but took pride in receiving his religious instruction at his mother's knee.
And all of us went to Mass every Tuesday Lent. We went to the Stations of the Cross every Friday, and we went to May devotions every May. My mother and father saw to that. I came from an excellent Catholic home. My mother was a marvelous woman. You should have known her.
I wish I had.
Oh, she was something.
So would you say that basically then that a lot, and when you were young, that the Irish women in the homes provided a lot of the religious instruction?
Yes, sir. That's where it came from. And of course, our Catholic schools, St. Patrick's and Cathedral, were excellent. They were all excellent Catholic Irish teachers. They knew their religion.
Well, it's interesting, and I haven't time to go into all this, but among the Irish men in Savannah, there was a certain current of anti-clericalism, and that maybe goes back to the United Irishmen and other things in Irish history. So there's an interesting divide there. In any case, May processions, which Canty mentions at one point, bridge those pre-Christian May Day celebrations with the veneration of Mary. And these ceremonies were widespread among Catholics in the British and Isles, as well as in Ireland. For her part, though, Flannery O'Connor was turned off by shows of piety. She declared herself a long-standing avoider of May processions and such like doings. And by the way, this indeed is Savannah on this side, and this is an almost contemporaneous May procession in Ireland. Burke remembered what he called a sort of fierce Irish spirit that dominated Catholicism in Savannah. And Bill Canty would say with some pride, Bishop Benjamin Joseph KEILEY was a man who took nothing off no Protestant minister. He answered them. And I found this rare portrait of the KEILEY brothers in the Virginia Historical Society. And I have to say, as the director of an archive, if you take nothing else away from this lecture, please remember this: label your photographs. Historians, relatives, posterity will thank you. And this is hard to make out here, but on the far left here is Anthony, who became the mayor of Richmond. He was a judge. And this man, John, is labeled in business. Then we have Benjamin, who indeed became the Bishop of Atlanta. And finally, William S., and it says, Playboy, I guess. I mean, look at his chops. I mean, you know, this goes to show you there's one in every family. It doesn't matter if your brother's the bishop, you know. Now, Monsignor Burke would say that he never encountered any obvious anti-Catholic prejudice, but he did know when he was out of his element.
Oh yes, one time, and it wasn't very friendly. I remember an incident. This was years ago in Perry. There's a Catholic church in Perry now. I was in the hotel. May have spent the night there. Sometimes we'd be cut out in the old days and spend the night in a motel or hotel. I remember the desk, I had breakfast anyway there. I said, any Catholics living in this town? And the clerk said, no, we wouldn't allow Catholics to live in this town. He didn't, maybe he didn't know what I was or anything. I said, oh, you never know, they'll come in. but you couldn't call, he wasn't really mean to me. Yeah. He answered my question.
So, I think this sense of running counter to the mainline culture in Georgia deeply permeated the consciousness of Irish Catholics in Flannery O'Connor's time. There are places where it comes into her writing. In this case, in a letter to Betty Hester, she mentions ex-priests who go on what she calls the Sawdust Trail. She might have had in mind family lore about Joseph Slattery, who had been a priest in Ireland, who left. He became a Baptist. He took to the United States lecture circuit. And these inflammatory leaflets that circulated before his visit to the Masonic Temple in Savannah meant that the Jewish mayor had to call up an armed escort for the ex-priest. Since Flannery O'Connor's ancestor, P.J. O'Connor, was a higher-up in the ancient order of Hibernians, one of the main parties to that Donnybrook, the so-called Slattery riots landed pretty close to home for the O'Connors.
Too, about one time that a speaker who was anti-Catholic was coming in town on a train, and the crowd was waiting for him.
Oh, that was the next priest.
Oh.
Yeah, next priest. His name was Slattery. Yes, sir. He was coming here, going to give a talk to Ku Klux Klans and about the Catholic Church. He didn't get off that train. Those Irishmen right down on the train. If you get off that train, you'll be a corpse.
When was this?
His name was Slattery. Father Slattery, next priest. When I was a kid, I was a boy, a little boy.
Oh, okay.
Down at the train station downtown?
Yeah, Union Station. Union Station. But he never got off that train. If you get off that train, you'll never get back. Boy, there was a big organization called APA, American Protectors Association, anti-Catholic to the core. The Irish had to stand around that convent all night long, protected.
Bill, I noticed that he was born in 1905, and Slattery came in 1895. So his recollection here might be a bit suspect, but he knew better than to let the facts get in the way of a good story. The point here is that Flannery O'Connor knew this dominant culture in Georgia inside and out. And in fact, she had stories where she kind of looked across the Protestant threshold. For example, she devotes chapter 5 of The Violent Bear It Away to a visit to a revival. And that's where we meet Lucette Carmody, a brooding child missionary of dark gaze who has been to India and China and spoken to all the rulers of the world. The girl's mother, decked out in a long dramatic cape with a red lining that could evoke Hester Prynne, Fulton Sheen, or both, refers to the family's travels in Rome, quote, where minds are still chained in priestly darkness. Apropos to that, let's hear from Monsignor Burke on the reactions of Georgia Protestants to an Irish Catholic priest.
So my experience was that I found the country people very ignorant of the Catholic Church, completely ignorant. But I did not find any personal animosity. Now, if they had known, I remember meeting an old fellow, giving him a ride one day. He asked me what did I, saw me wearing the collar. I said, a Catholic. He said, were the Catholics established by Christ? I said, yes. Not that it seemed to worry him too much, because he says, well, recently I established my own church, he said. He didn't want to be his own. Yes. Then in Douglas one day, one of the towns out from Douglas, I was talking to a crowd in a little store, and they said, you're a Catholic? Yes, I said, I am. Well, you're a Holy Catholic, you're not a Roman Catholic. I said, you're really all the one. There's only the one Catholic church. But they were open to, I found them very nice.
So that to me sounds like it's lifted directly from a Flannery O'Connor story. Now, she was certainly exposed to organizations like the Knights of Columbus and her father's beloved American Legion. But I want to make a quick point about her roots and her family. And unfortunately, I don't have enough time to go into all the history here. But this is the family patriarch. This is P.J. O'Connor on the left here. And, the Irish pedigree kind of begins there with a man who was highly identified with Irish boosters in Savannah. A nephew of Flannery O'Connor's grandfather, P.J. O'Connor rose to rapid prominence in Irish-American circles in his 49 years. And P.J.'s namesake, another prominent O'Connor man, would say the final words over Flannery O'Connor's grave. The youngest of 5 children of P.J. O'Connor and Winifred Marr, and a second cousin to Flannery O'Connor's father, Monsignor P.J. O'Connor dropped in on Flannery O'Connor in 1961, much to her delight. And then there were the Trainors, the Hardys, the Stevens, the Kleins, all of Irish descent. There's not enough time to go into the full details of the Irishness of the family, but you get the drift, and you can get a full account of it if you read my book. You'll learn even more when Bill Sessions' biography of Flannery O'Connor comes out. It's complete, and we hope to see it in print very soon. So now that we've looked at Irishness and the culture of Flannery's Savannah and in her family, I'd like to conclude by revisiting the ways in which being Irish Catholic informed her faith. She knew her church history, after all. She once wrote, apparently someone had suggested that there wasn't enough sin in Ireland to supply the need. Sean O'Fallon said, no, the Irish sin constantly, but with no great emotion except fear. Fill in the blank. What comes after Catholic that starts with G? I heard it. Guilt. Yes. So, right. Mike Farraher also said, if Catholic school was our foundation of guilt, our mothers were the travel agents for the guilt trip. And he tells the story of having, his Saturday night fun and waking up with a sore head, as the Irish would say, and his mother coming to get him to go to Mass. And he said, I don't feel like getting up. And She said, well, I suppose our Savior didn't feel like getting up the day he went to die for your sins. So, in any case, Flannery O'Connor understood the historical origins of that association between guilt and Catholicism. Following the teachings of Cornelius Jansen, the Jansenists, who started to look a lot like Calvinists, denied free will and came finally to believe that human nature was incapable of good. Now imagine their chart for Mr. Rake. It's like rotten, 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 rotten right through. Flannery once wrote, I like Pascal, but I don't think the Jansenist influence is healthy in the church. The Irish are notably infected with it because all the Jansenist priests were chased out of France at the time of the Revolution and ended up in Ireland. It was a bad day, if you ask me. She detected the Jansenistic influence in being taught by the sisters to measure your sins with a slide rule, which she said drove, quote, some folks nuts and some folks to the Baptists. But beyond her historical awareness of the peculiarities of Irish Catholicism, Flannery O'Connor's Irish roots might have shown plainly in the habit of her self-criticism. For example, when writing to a friend that she did not care to wash in Lourdes on account of a lack of privacy, she added automatically, this is neither right nor holy of me, but it is what it is. From the Irish encounter with Jansenism, from the incalculable losses of the famine, and from the siege mentality of the hedge schools and the resurgence of the devotional revolution, there emerged a version of self-denying and self-preserving Catholicism that strained so mightily that it seemed to take on some of the severity of Jansenism itself. The cliché of Catholic guilt, the sort that's abundantly evident on the pages of Flannery's prayer journal, by the way, has to be set against what James Joyce dubbed the nightmare of Irish history, in which survival itself is a form of reproach. To be Irish Catholic is indeed to think of the long train of souls strained in, let me start over. To be Irish Catholic is indeed to think of the long train of souls stranded in purgatory. They call from the ships, the famine cottages, the almshouse, and the brothel. Their tickets weren't punched, and there, but for the grace of God, went you.
Mama used to walk along the streets of Broughton Street in those days with everything was Broughton Street when we were children. There was no such thing as mall. And Mom and the girls from the red light district would come up and put money in Mama's hands. Oh. And my mother's sister said, I don't see how you could stop on the street and talk to a woman of ill fame. Mama said if I didn't meet the train and give you a home, maybe you'd have been a woman of ill fame. Yeah.
And yet, there could be a tremendous gift in this, a gift of grace, humility, and charity. Can we say, as the poet Elizabeth Bishop did, that the art of losing isn't hard to master? So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, that their loss is no disaster. Flannery O'Connor knew a good deal about loss. She suffered the loss of a parent in her health early in life. She understood that positive gifts could come from what Teilhard de Chardin called passive diminishments, as she wrote in a memoir of Mary Ann. She herself was so much greater than her losses. She was confirmation of Keats' notion that an intelligence becomes a soul through being schooled in a world of pain and troubles. As the member of an entrenched minority, she was a born contrarian, and in her art and in her orthodoxy, she was